Thing in progress.
Hello, and welcome to Let the Story Write Itself, episode 44. Today I'm talking about the power of environment and how to curate your space and curate your energy. Your space is quite inextricably linked with your energy and vice versa, meaning that your energetic state will influence the space around you, and likewise, the space that you inhabit will influence your state. What's that quote by Oscar Wilde? The senses affect the soul as the soul affects the senses, something to that effect, which really means that it's not just the tangible that exists out of nowhere, like doesn't come out in a vacuum, right? Everything that's created in the physical really stems from the human mind, the human spirit, the human thought process. And so if things that can for example, like when you think of spirituality, you might not think like, oh, it has to do with just simply enjoying life. Like, if something tastes good, if something, the texture of things, um, how things taste, how things sound, these material senses related to the physical are in fact very spiritual. Like they're grounded in the spiritual because these physical things actually come from the intangible spiritual. So when you consider like how inextricably linked your physical with your spiritual is, you start to be more appreciative of the natural, like the physical environment, right? As when I was a kid growing up, I always loved having we just grew up in like a big backyard and there were like lots of greenery and like evergreen trees just outside. Having that green space was such like an important part of my upbringing, and then in the winter we got to like build snowmen and just observe the different seasons. Like growing up in Canada, there are in fact four distinct seasons. So even though I just lived in the one place my whole childhood and upbringing, it felt like there was this natural dynamicism with the changing of the seasons. And we always had like raspberries in the summertime. And I had like a playhouse built for me, like a pink and white one in the garden. And so it felt very much like my own space. Obviously, it was just like the family garden and backyard. And there were like bunny rabbits outside. And it was just like such like a homey, safe space for me. And this, it's like realizing that like life doesn't just exist within the four walls. I always like got outside and like would go to like my neighbors and we'd like ride bikes and like the school I went to was just like nearby and everything was just there was a lot of creativity and that play and like the indoors and outdoors and I wasn't just kind of like for me I had a very creative childhood essentially. And at the time that when I went to university, like I found like I wasn't really called to that environment, which I found to be much more of a constrictive space, like it's much more methodical, linear, like focused on particular vocation that I was never particularly called to. So this is where the power of your environment can really it really is inextricably linked to who you are. When I'm simply like, in childhood, things are so, at least for in my experience, it's much more free flowing. You go to your classes, but they're a lot more, at least for me, like I noticed like the classes I tended to gravitate to were like English classes, art class. I even joined the pottery club, like an extracurricular activity after school. So these were the classes that I naturally gravitated to. And when I look back to like my whole childhood and upbringing, a lot of it was the fact that I, within myself, like I also played piano. So I had like my piano and was just surrounded by like music and books and art and creativity and fun and play and a garden and like bunny rabbits and evergreen trees. And I was always like a lot in my imagination. And at some point I even like asked my mom, can we change? Like we had like this red carpet, which was very like in a way I quite liked because it was like different and it's unique and it's it's like colorful. It's not just like a drab like beige or something that most houses have. And at some point I was like, can we change to hardwood floors? I think I was like in university. And so like my mom went for it and then we changed to like these natural, beautiful hardwood floors, like the natural quality of wood, right? And I love that clean, simple feeling and the natural element. And I felt like it really elevated like the presence of the home. And we had that like installed throughout, right? Even through the bedrooms. And for me, I've always felt this intrinsic connection with the physical environment and the surroundings. So I was always like I was the person who was always rearranging furniture, like whether in my bedroom or even like in the living room or like other spaces in the house that were not technically mine. I would always be like moving things. Even just like kitchen, like the cabinet, I'd always be rearranging it, like organizing it, labeling things. And for me, it was like this idea that because I'm so intuitive, I would often just have this feeling like, oh, that doesn't belong there. It should really be here. And I wasn't really thinking of it necessarily from a logical place. I was often feeling into the energy of it and just like I would often get like these prompts or like inspired ideas. I'm like, okay, move this here, move that there. And whether I was just doing like innate feng shui or whatever, like I never really like had a studied practice or methodology. Like I didn't like would never really know like specifically what went whether. I found it quite confusing. And I would kind of just go with my own instincts and like what felt good and like what felt it was always a feeling of like, that feels lighter. That feels like more peaceful. Like you can breathe better. Like there's a feeling of expansion. There's a feeling of lightness. There's, a feeling of excitement and somehow like a peace where you don't feel like something's off or something's unsettled. So I've always been very attuned to the energy behind things. And even now, like as I, use a computer much more than I did, say, when I was a child, obviously there's the digital environment that impacts also your own state of being. So vice versa, your own state of being also influences how you manage your own digital space and your digital files. And that's the kicker because a lot of times it's not just like, oh, all these things are, yes, you're like the filter that it moves through. So you as the individual being source, everything is filtering through you. So your own state also determines like the environment and how things get managed by you and like the filters that it goes through you. Meanwhile, on the opposite end, you know, the way like the inspiration that you get, like the ideas that you have are often, if you're living in a space that inspires, I remember my childhood home has like a lot of sunlight filtering through. I mentioned there's like bunny rabbits just outside and like evergreen trees. When you just look outside, you can see like the greenery. So he's always had this idea of like inspire, like expansion. I always had like this uplifting feeling every time from just being at home. And that's such a privilege because if your home space is able to regularly inspire and uplift you, you're already an advantage in that essentially. And that's where, you want to keep yourself in a mentally stimulating environment and in a mentally stimulating space, right? In my currently I do a lot of travel. Like I'm currently abroad. I'm in Hong Kong. Just prior I was in Vietnam and I've been to over 55 countries. So I've, experienced a lot of places in different environments, different settings, different homes, different spaces, different, whatnot, like different energies. And I I notice that in the places where you have to, if you hold your own energy, you can always impact the space around you. But even better is when there's that nice receiving and giving energy, where there's that flow between, where it's like the space you're in nurtures you just as much as you're able to nurture it. So you don't want to be in a space where you're feeling like you're really having to just hold yourself, clear all the time without getting that receiving flow. You're in a place where you feel like you're having to constantly like motivate yourself or like pull yourself out up and like get going, that can be an indicator that you need to start adding elements that can naturally inspire you and get you feeling like, oh, maybe I want to go outside right now, or I'm inspired to write a story or go play the piano or study a language or something that elevates you to like the higher senses, like the higher order values, like as Plato says, the higher order values being like joy, love, peace, beauty, charity, peace, wisdom, benevolence, all that. These are often like the higher frequency thoughts if you're thinking about like the emotional frequency and resonance and state of being that your human energetic self is, constantly resonating at. So whether, lower levels would be like dark, more like darkness, like anger, rage, like hopelessness, resentment, fear. And then moving up to higher levels is that sense of elation, of joy, of appreciation, of gratitude, of wonder, of possibility. And your environment, if it's a beautiful sunny day out, a lot of times, the sun is a source of energy. The moon is also a source of energy. So, in the nighttime, you may also find yourself drawn to the simplicity and the quiet and the stillness of the darkness. Meanwhile, if you're somewhere where, you're like in a windowless room, or there's like paint peeling off the walls, or I don't know, maybe there's like some toxic elements within your space. I'm talking about literally toxic, there's like, some places are not built with the best type of material, or there's chemicals involved, and that can also impact your state of being, and not only your mindset, but your health, and just the way that you think and go about your day. So it's so important that you recognize this mind, body, spirit connection with the what you call like the virtual, not the virtual landscape, but the landscape essentially, whether it is virtual or the physical landscape, your avatar, like your being. I tend to think of things as like a game. So it's like your physical being in like the landscape. It's not just like, oh, you're just in the landscape. You're also receiving input. It's like a mutual exchange. And, currently I, it's like constant, like, it's like this, it's an ongoing dynamic practice. So there's always going to be shifts as you go along in life, different stages of your life. And maybe one thing, you'll feel called to like rearrange certain things, or reorganize, or, move to different places, or what once worked in one season is now being called to shift to a new way. And there's always that adjustment, right? I find myself going even deeper into simplifying and really kind of just decluttering. I always think of like the Tesla model, like when you're inside a Tesla, there's like no clutter, there's like no dashboard essentially. There is just like white space, it's like white noise. It's like, so it's also like the it's very, very quiet inside of a Tesla. It's in a way very inoculated and insulated from the noise of the external world. And I always think of like, I was like, this is kind of, when you're in that space, you feel almost like the heaviness and the almost like the need to like do more when you're in a standard vehicle than when you're in a Tesla. Like it almost just drives itself. It's so quiet, it's so clean. It feels like there's a certain lightness. And that's something that, you know, you when you're in the physical space, it's not really something that maybe you can just imagine. It's something that you actually get from being in that new environment, in that new space. And so it's so important that when you're allowing things to come into your life, that you be open to new possibilities, that you be open to new ways of doing things that you might not even be aware of. Because if you're constantly operating from your mind and trying to think about, oh, I need to do this from this logical place, you're not necessarily allowing room for the unknown, or for something like, say, experiencing a Tesla for the first time, or realizing like, okay, there's actually a different state of being than maybe you are used to. If you've always just driven a standard vehicle, maybe you're not aware of how a clean and precise a Tesla can feel. And sometimes you may not necessarily be able to, how do you actually draw these things in? How do you call these things in? I always say it starts from within, because as within, so without, as above, so below. It's that connection that whatever's happening within you is also being reflected in the natural environment. So if you were to kind of tap into the energy that you want more of, whether that's peace, joy, love, beauty, excitement, wonder, awe, joy, appreciation, first tap into the energy of that. That's why gratitude practice is so important, because when you get your own aura, frequency, vibrational state into alignment with the core emotion and the feeling, and preferably one on a high level on a high vibrational aspect of this vibrational scale, then you naturally start to influence the things going on around you. It really does start within before the changes can be made without. And if you happen to find yourself in a place that kind of shifts your internal state, that is also something to anchor in and be like, wow, maybe some place makes you feel a lot lighter. Like inspired, and you can take that then back and shift some things, whether that's suddenly you're like, you know what, I am just releasing all of this right now. I do not need any of these things. I'm letting go of this. Whether that's like physical clutter, maybe you clear out your wardrobe, maybe you do a deep declutter of your desktop files, something like that, where something from the external shifts your internal, and suddenly, as that reciprocal relationship, now your new internal state is affecting your physical state. Well, now you're inspired to let go of the thing that maybe you've been holding on to, or that for some reason you couldn't quite see like the pathway, but suddenly you're like, you know what? I don't actually need this, or this is like no longer resonating with me. So a lot of times those internal emotions can be dislodged and even like shifted into new ways of being. And that's where the physical and the spiritual are so inextricably linked. So today I wanted to, ask you, you know, I wouldn't say just go in and like try to declutter something or to try to change something in your environment. I would really say start from within and find that source of inspiration. An inspired idea is often a lot more truthful than anything that comes from the top down approach where you're thinking with your mind and trying to apply it. Those things that somehow just it's like it feels like hard, it feels effortful. You don't want that. You want something that, get yourself into a space that just naturally elevates you, that inspires you, that brings out a better state of mind, a state of being. Or alternatively, do something that elevates you, playing music, creating art, going for a bicycle ride, something like that, spending time in nature. Changing your internal physical state then produces the inspired idea. So instead of telling yourself, I'm going to do this, change your internal state and then see what arises, see what you're called to. So, first, start with doing something that will either shift your internal state or get you into an environment that will help you to do this. And from there, then see what pops up and that let that be your guide. So, today's episode has been about the power of the environment and the power of your spiritual self to shape your environment, and likewise the environment to shape your spirit. So, you know, create your space, create your energy, and allow yourself to be inspired. And that is episode 44 of Let the Story Write Itself.